There's the table with all of the desserts, and I would just go for one of everything on that dessert table, even if I didn't like it, but it was like my cheat day and it was my day to indulge, and I would just dive headlong into that table. I would get one of everything again, even the things I didn't like, and I would eat everything, even past fullness, just because again, it was like my day that I would allow myself these sugary treats, and I would feel physically full afterwards, so bloated, so full, so sick. And I would feel, in addition to the physical symptoms, I would just feel so much shame and frustration and anger at myself that I had done this to my body, that I had undone all of the good eating I had done before the holiday. And it got into this very vicious cycle of restricting the sugar and then binging on the sugar. So if anybody is feeling that way, let me know in the chat that you have this kind of restrict and binge cycle when it comes to sugar. You don't allow it, and then it seems like you can't stop. So if that's you, this masterclass is for you. So here's what you're going to learn today from me. The first thing is why it feels like you're so addicted to sugar, why you feel the pull is so strong. The second thing we're going to learn is sugar actually bad for you? Is all of this popular media, things that we read on social media, is it all really true? The third thing is why dieting won't break the addiction. We'll talk about what will break the addiction, but I do want to go a little bit into why dieting in particular and restriction and not allowing the sugar is actually not going to help break the addiction. It's actually going to make it worse long term. And then the fourth thing we're going to go over is how to befriend sugar and what befriending sugar will actually do for you. And by befriending sugar, I mean actually allowing yourself to have it. And I'm going to give you 5 strategies on how to allow sugar into your diet without you feeling like you can't control yourself around it. So, addicted to sugar. Is it addiction or is it really just restriction? And these are 4 scientific studies that were conducted that relate to this idea of sugar addiction and restriction. And I'll get straight to the point where there is actually nothing, like the sugar addiction does not exist. Never say never. Obviously, there are some people who perhaps really are addicted to sugar, but they're finding in the scientific studies that this is actually a very, very, very rare occurrence. And what is happening instead of addiction is this pull of restriction. And that's what these 4 studies kind of prove is it's not addiction. It is restriction and the response to restriction. So the first was the CAR study done in 2004. With this study, rats were starved for 12 hours. And the control group was a group of rats that was not starved. So we had one starved group and one not starved group. And both of the groups of rats were given sugar. And the control group that wasn't restricted didn't binge on the sugar, but we found that the group of rats that was being restricted with food actually ended up binging on the sugar. So it kind of showed that whatever we restrict, we end up binging on later on. And you guys, and I'm sure a lot of the audience knows this to be true. If you try to be good in the morning, maybe skip breakfast and not eat a ton for lunch, you're trying to save calories, you think you're doing the right thing by limiting calories, but you find by the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're stressed, and all you can think about is food, and you end up binging and overeating at night. The reason that you're doing that is because of the restriction earlier on in the day. In the Keeler study of 2015, participants were asked to restrict chocolate for 3 weeks. So they were told exactly when the window of 3 weeks was going to be. And the participants who were asked to do that, asked to restrict chocolate for 3 weeks, they binged on chocolate more both before and after the period of restriction. And the reason that is, before, it's the Last Supper mentality. So they ate a lot more chocolate before the restriction period started because they had what we call that Last Supper mentality, that idea of, oh my gosh, I have to eat all of the chocolate now because I know I'm not going to be able to have it for 3 weeks. So they end up eating more on average before kind of preparing for this period of restriction. And then those participants actually ate more chocolate after the restricted period had ended as well, because again, they hadn't been able to have chocolate for 3 weeks. So naturally, all they thought about was wanting that chocolate. So when the study ended, they ended up on average having more chocolate than the control group. And then there was the taper study of 2017. The study was done with children. We had two groups of children. One group was told they could have all of the red and yellow M&Ms that they wanted. And then the other group was told they could not have any red M&Ms. They could only have the yellows. Well, do you want to guess which group had more of the red M&Ms? It was the group that were told they couldn't have the red M&Ms. It goes to show what we resist persists, and we always want as a human species what we cannot have. And the kicker of this study, of course, is that all M&Ms taste the same. It doesn't matter if they're red or blue or yellow, it's all the same on the inside. It's just the mere suggestion of being told that they couldn't have something drove the children to want that thing more. And then finally, the Galloway study in 2010 showed that the more a parent restricts their child's eating, the more they want for the forbidden food, and the more they feel disconnected with their own bodies. And that goes with adults too. If we are using all of these external measures to control our bodies, if we use calorie counters or apps like MyFitnessPal or the scale, right? When we weigh ourselves on the scale, if we're using all of those external tools, we can't learn how to turn inward and hone into our own body's cues of hunger and fullness and satiety. They also found that the children whose parents restricted their eating began to buy into the belief that they, as humans, were not capable of making their own decisions when it came to their bodies. So there was this decreased sense of autonomy and empowerment to make their own choices. And it led to more increased risk of emotional eating for those children and higher BMI for those children, especially the girls and the women, because we have this narrative for ladies out there across the globe that we have to be thin, we have to be small, and therefore have to restrict our calories. So again, all of this to say, sugar addiction is a very, very rare thing. It's more a question of the restriction. Are you restricting, and is that backfiring for you? So here is kind of how the cycle looks. Let's talk about ice cream, okay? If we restrict ice cream or moderate the ice cream or measure it out, or we feel a lot of guilt and shame about it, we end up having this cognitive preoccupation with sugar. It's what we want. It's put on this pedestal. We see it as more valuable because it's something that we cannot have. And when we put foods on a pedestal and they're this thing that we can't have, but we really, really want, that's when we start having these symptoms of binge eating or eating past fullness or eating the sugar or the dessert or the forbidden food really quickly because we want the experience to be over with, because we have the sense of shame while we're doing it. These are also the foods that we eat in secret because we know that we're not supposed to be eating them. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm about to get very vulnerable. I have eaten sugar and desserts like out of the trash. I have thrown them out and then still really wanted them and would pick them up out of the trash and eat them again. So like I say that so that everybody knows that I have absolutely been where you might be right now. I have done some very cringy, embarrassing behaviors around sugar. I found out that it was simply because I was not allowing myself to have them on the regular. Okay, so a lot of people have heard the science behind the idea that sugar is just as addictive as cocaine, right? You see, I'm sure many of you have seen this photo where it's like, here's how the brain lights up when it has sugar. Here's how the brain lights up when it has cocaine, and it looks very similar, right? This is just a brain scan of someone's dopamine receptors lighting up. Okay, so dopamine is that feel-good hormone in the brain. It's why we are more drawn to high sugar, high fat, high calorie foods, because it gives us the biggest dopamine hit. Now, anything that produces dopamine in your brain is going to light up your brain like this. Your brain will also light up very similarly when you watch a super cute cat video or somebody gives you a hug. This has been like demonized, right? The sugar's been demonized because of these like brain scan photos, but really anything that gives you a dopamine hit is going to light up your brain like that. It's not that sugar is a bad thing. It's not that hugs or cute cat videos are a bad thing. It's just that our bodies crave dopamine, and we have different ways of satisfying that need and getting that dopamine hit. Okay. So, there are a couple of different reasons why we might be getting this flawed narrative in terms of, sugar and it being addictive. The first is conditioning. We might just be conditioned to always turn to sugar when we feel depressed, when we feel tired, when we feel we need a pick-me-up, when we feel we need to be happy, when we have a birthday celebration. It's kind of like Pavlov's dogs, where, they understood eventually that when you ring the bell, food is going to come. And I know the host so graciously shared that when she finishes her dinner, she feels like she needs something sweet afterward. That is a conditioned pattern that can be relearned. Again, you might be dopamine deficient. That might be another reason why you feel so addicted to sugar. Those who have ADHD, for example, tend to be dopamine deficient. So they need more hits of dopamine. And that's why a lot of people who have ADHD tend to find that they have very impulsive behaviors around food. They have a lot of binging episodes around food. And then flawed food addiction studies. So there was a Yale food addiction questionnaire that generated a lot of headline news a couple of years ago. But upon closer look, the questionnaire seemed to be actually measuring compulsive eating and rebound eating from chronic dieting as opposed to sugar addiction. So like some of the questions on the questionnaire were, I find myself consuming certain foods even though I'm no longer hungry. Classic compulsive eating or distracted eating can also cause this, not necessarily any of the chemicals that are in sugar. Another question on the survey was, I worry about cutting down on certain foods. Chronic dieting and overeating can also cause that. Another statement on the, sorry about that. Another statement on that survey was, I've spent time dealing with negative feelings from overeating certain foods instead of spending time in more important activities like time with friends, family, work, or recreation. Again, chronic dieting and compulsive eating can also cause those symptoms. So it can be restriction, and most often it is simply the restriction of foods than it is, being actually addicted. Dieting can actually cause a lot of these symptoms. Okay, so is sugar really bad for you? Okay, this is a very complicated answer. It's not yes and it's not no. You could just eat sugar, but when we police it, we find that we end up eating more sugar than if we just learn how to heal our relationship with the sugar. Once we kind of make peace with sugar and understand that we can have it whenever we want, that pull becomes less and less. So why dieting or cutting out sugar altogether won't help? Because this is like the most common thing I see is like, oh, I'm addicted to sugar. I really just have to cut it all out because I know I can't be next to it or I'm going to binge on it. And they want to go on a diet that is like a no sugar, no flour, no this, that, or the other thing. And they think that's going to be the thing that helps them not eat sugar ever again. But again, it's not realistic and it's definitely not going to help. Here's why. Again, not realistic. Food is celebratory. It's not just fuel. It's how we make memories. If we took the joy out of food, our lives would become pretty boring, right? And it would make all of those social events feel very anxiety inducing. Like imagine going to a child's birthday party and not having any sugar, or participating in any like cultural traditions that surround themselves with food. So anybody in the States, right, when we bake cookies for Christmas, it's part of our memories, right? I mean, when we're babies, we crave our mother's milk as a source of comfort. So we've always had this wiring in our brains that food equals comfort. Vacations, right? Like who wants to go on a vacation and not eat any sugar? We can eat nourishingly most of the time. We can eat healthful foods and be our healthiest versions of ourselves and still have sugar and still be able to use food as a celebratory tool. The second is when we cut sugar out, it leads to binging and eating more on average. So let's say you want an Oreo cookie, right? And you're not allowing yourself that one Oreo cookie because you told yourself you were not going to have any more sugar. That's going to cause you to have a preoccupation with sugar in your brain. You're going to keep thinking about it and wanting it and wishing you could have it. And that anticipation and that preoccupation with the cookie builds and builds and builds like over the course of the day, to eventually we don't have any more willpower and we end up eating a whole sleeve of Oreo cookies at night because we didn't release that valve. It's like when you're holding your breath, eventually you have to release that and take a huge gulp of air. As opposed to if you were just taking small, normal sips of air, you wouldn't have that gasping effect. So that gasping effect is very similar to how we react to sugar when we restrict it for too long. And then number 3, sugar-free things lead to other issues, right? A lot of sugar-free cookies or packaged goods, they have a lot of chemicals and additives in them. And those additives cause a higher risk of diabetes and weight gain, and have other side effects like migraines and digestive issues. Basically, all of the things that we were hoping to avoid by avoiding sugar, we can actually have those things happen to us anyway through these sugar-free, chemically laden foods. Plus, let's be honest, they taste like crap. And with a lot of them, your brain still thinks you're getting sugar. So it's going to react in the same way as if you actually had sugar. So you're actually not breaking that conditioning, that kind of Pavlovian response anyway. And then you're just eating something that's not as good. So befriending sugar in order to not feel addicted. So again, we've kind of gone over the science behind why it's not really addiction, it's more restriction, and how the restriction is harming you. It's leading you to binge and overeat and have preoccupation with sugar throughout your entire day. So that's probably not working for anybody. It probably hasn't worked for you, and you've tried before, of course, and you obviously thought you were the problem because it didn't work, but it's not you, okay? It's that you have to try a new strategy, and the new strategy is actually befriending sugar and seeing what happens. So I have 5 strategies on how to do that. The first is simply to allow it. And this is what the workbook does. So if you didn't see the first slide, if you go to freedomwithfoodandfitness.com/sugar, you'll get the workbook that helps you go through the 5 strategies. The first is called habituation. So habituation is constant exposure to a stimulus so that the reaction to that stimulus becomes less and less and less over time. So a good example that has nothing to do with food is the first time your partner says, I love you. You get butterflies, you get so excited, oh my God, they just said it. And then 10 years into the relationship, if they say, I love you, it maybe, hopefully it still means something to you, but you don't elicit that same response to that stimulus 10 years down the road than you did the first time. Same thing applies to sugar, this idea of habituation. Constant exposure to sugar will make it lose its luster. So for example, I had a client who was very addicted to banana Laffy Taffy candy. And I told her, I want you to buy the fun size pieces. I want you to have one every single day for a month. And I want you to tell me if the pull for the banana Laffy Taffy on day 1 was as strong as the pull on day 30. And sure enough, she told me by day 30, she didn't want it as much because she knew she could have it every single day. It had lost its power over her. Okay. And of course, in a journey like, allowing all foods, something a little bit more intuitive eating, you might find that in the beginning, your brain and your body don't trust each other. And you might find that when you start allowing that sugar, you eat more of it than you would prefer. But if you stick to it and you're consistent and you keep allowing that thing that you weren't allowing yourself, that treat, eventually the pull becomes less and less, and it becomes just like any other food. I have chocolate every single day, and you'll never see me binge on chocolate because I know I don't have to. It's just a treat that I allow myself every single day. The second is learning how to re-listen to your body's cues. Okay, we call this interoceptive awareness. It's being aware of the body signals that your body gives you when it needs certain things. And when me as an intuitive eating coach, when I talk about interoceptive awareness, we focus mostly on hunger, fullness, and satiety. So with intuitive eating, we eat whatever we want, whenever we want. But the key to intuitive eating being a vehicle for optimal health is that we always check in with how our body feels. So, how do we feel before eating the sugar? Right? Are we jittery? Are we nervous? Have we eaten anything recently? How do we feel while we're eating the sugar? Right? Are we doing it very guiltfully, with a lot of anxiety? Are we eating it really quickly? Are we being mindful with it? Are we savoring it? And then what happens after we eat the sugar? Do we feel jittery? Do we feel sick? How do we feel? And what happens just before we want to eat all of the sugar at once, right? Did something upsetting really happen? Did you have a fight with your spouse or your boss? Or have you not eaten anything all day? Or do you feel really stressed? What is that emotion that is cropping up for you before you dive into the sugar? I think out of the 4 questions here, the third is the most crucial. It's what happens after we eat the sugar? Like, look at, I could absolutely enjoy a huge bowl of ice cream, like 5 scoops with all of the toppings. It sounds so amazing, especially since I'm starting to get hungry for lunch over here in the States. But I know how I would feel if I ate an entire huge bowl of ice cream. I would feel so sick and bloated and gassy. Physically in my, like, I wouldn't have any shame about it because I've healed my relationship to food, but I would feel physically awful. So I have to think to myself before I sit down to eat something, how does future Alana want to feel when this meal is finished? So I can totally have ice cream. I never deny myself ice cream when I want it, but I always have that thought in my head of, okay, how much of this can I have before I start to feel badly afterward, physically? The third is to get a good night's sleep. We gravitate towards sugar most to keep us awake when we haven't slept enough. And I know we're in a go, 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 very busy, very hustle culture time in our history, but we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. When we also have that adequate amount of sleep, we tend to make more nourishing choices because we're making decisions from the rational part of our brain instead of the primitive part of our brain. So when we have enough rest, we make better decisions because we're making them ahead of time. We're not making these like primitive brain last minute decisions like, yeah, I'm just going to go grab these cookies in the pantry because I'm hungry. When we're well rested, we can sit down and pause and say, okay, what do I need? What does my body need right now? What's going to nourish me, but also be delicious? And how is that food going to make me feel afterward? Okay. Fourth strategy toward befriending sugar is learning how to build a plate. So, again, intuitive eating is all about eating what you want and honoring your cravings, but that doesn't mean that we don't understand nutrition. All right. Gentle nutrition is actually one of our 10 principles. So, learning how to build a meal or build a plate so that it has a fat, a protein, a carb, a fiber. Okay. That's going to help us keep our blood sugar steady. It's going to keep us satisfied so that we're not grazing on food throughout the day, and it's going to keep us fuller longer. And if we can meet all of those needs, we're not going to have a sugar crash that leads us to wanting more sugar. So the way I tell my clients to build a plate is I tell them to start with whatever they're craving. Again, we want to honor our cravings as intuitive eaters. So let's say you're just really moved for avocado. Like an avocado, it's nice ripe avocado, sounds really delicious right now, and it's getting to be lunchtime. That's a healthy fat, right? So you have to think to yourself, okay, I really want this avocado. I'm going to honor that craving. What else can I add to this avocado that's going to create a well-rounded plate? So you could say, oh, I could build a really nice salad. I could throw in some grilled chicken. That's going to be my protein. I really want a carb. So I'm going to put in some sliced strawberries, which would also give us the fiber that we need, right? We always need some fiber. We're going to put on a nice dressing, right? We're not going to eat a dry salad. We're not just going to squirt some lemon on there. We're going to have a nice dressing because that's going to keep us satisfied. That's going to make the meal delicious. Okay. So again, building that plate so it has all 3 macronutrients plus your fiber is going to keep you from reaching in the pantry toward the sugar later on in the day. And lastly, to have a good relationship with sugar, you need other coping mechanisms other than sugar. You need to practice regular self-care. And there's a lot of different versions of self-care. There are 6 different categories. There is emotional self-care, social, spiritual, physical, practical, and mental. So if you have a self-care toolkit, so to speak, things that you can turn to when you are feeling a little bit emotional or anxious or stressed that isn't sugar, that is going to help you out immensely. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be a spa day trip. It doesn't have to be any of those things because, not all of us have the time or the money. It could simply be sitting in a quiet room and doing 10 deep breaths. It could be a 5-minute guided meditation using a free app. It could be taking a walk in nature, changing your environment and your surroundings. But another thing that I always tell my clients is schedule in your self-care. I mean, yes, in the middle of the day, things come up, you get really stressed, you have some tools that you could just use, in the moment. But I always tell my clients, schedule in time regularly in your calendar for self-care because we always want to put ourselves last, especially the ladies out there. We always think we have to take care of everybody else before ourselves, but that leaves us, it leaves our cup empty, and we end up filling that empty cup with sugar because we need energy and we also want to comfort ourselves because we're so stressed out. But if we don't let ourselves get to that point, we won't be reaching for the sugar as often. We will be taking care of our mental, emotional, and spiritual needs through other modes of self-care. So, healing your relationship with sugar and becoming an intuitive eater. It sounds wonderful. I'm sure a lot of you guys are saying, yeah, this really sounds great, but I don't know how to implement this. I don't know how to do this by myself. I feel like I would do it wrong. I feel like I would fail. It is something, speaking as somebody who went from, eating disorders to becoming an intuitive eating coach, it's something that takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of accountability, and a lot of support, but it does cure the sugar addiction unequivocally all of the time. Dieting doesn't work, but intuitive eating certainly does. So I am going to pitch very quickly my program. I have an intuitive eating coaching program that is global, everywhere from here in my home state of New Jersey all the way to Australia. I have had clients. It is called Defy the Diet. It is an 8-week intuitive eating and mindset program that includes virtual, group, and private coaching. And this is the framework that I take all of my clients through. The first thing that we do is we we redefine what health is, what beauty is, and what worth is. The second thing we do is we assess your current nutrition and movement habits. What have you been doing in both of those areas, and how has it been serving you or not serving you? The next thing that we do is we create a non-diet nutrition and fitness plan that is perfect for you and your body and your needs. And the fourth thing that we do is we apply the strategies that we learned through creating your nutrition and fitness program and all the mindset work that we do around those things, and we apply it to other areas of your life, because mindset work is universal. It's not just mindset work to learn how to love your body and have a better relationship with food, but it's mindset work that can be applied to work and home and parenting and relationships. So that is the framework that I bring my clients through. These are the modules: learning how to define health and diet culture, creating non-diet intentions and setting boundaries, how to learn to listen to our bodies, making peace with food and hunger, discovering fullness, satisfaction, and pleasure in food, assessing current levels of and beliefs around fitness, how to create a joyful movement plan, and then how to audit our time for more healthful movement routines and self-care. So I bring you through a whole bunch of stuff that is also, yes, going to help heal your addiction to sugar. I have a couple of packages. I have the base freedom package, which I just launched. It is 8 self-paced modules jam-packed with strategies that I've learned personally. So they're personally vetted. They're also vetted through my clients. They 100% work. That is $47 paid in full. That is on my website right now. And then the starter freedom package has the 8 modules with accompanying worksheets and meditations, a Facebook group for clients, and live group coaching calls with me and my co-coach Maria. That is $497 paid in full, or a payment plan of $55 a week for 10 weeks. My gold freedom package has everything from the previous slide, plus daily text message support, plus 2 hours of private coaching with my co-coach. That is $997 paid in full, or $120 a week for 10 weeks. And then my most popular package, the VIP package, is everything I just said, plus daily text message support with me for a whole year for any obstacles that you might face in your journey, and then 1 hour bi-weekly group coaching calls for an entire year. So that is $1997 paid in full, or $220 a week for 10 weeks. So this program, Defy the Diet, any of the packages are perfect for anybody who has been yo-yo dieting, chronic dieting, is an emotional eater, a binge eater, not happy with their body, wish they weighed less, want to feel comfortable in their own skin, eat foods that are nourishing but still delicious. Those are my people. So if that sounds like you, if that resonates with you, and you want to heal your relationship to food and your body and have a guilt-free relationship with food, feel good in your skin, this program is 100% for you. Couple of testimonials from my clients. Defy the Diet has helped me exceed my expectations of what I'm capable of and what my body can do. This program has completely changed my life. I can finally put time back into my life and into what makes me happy. The extra support Alana provided between sessions was critical to my success. This is somebody who had the VIP text message support. That in-the-moment coaching was the missing piece I never found in all my other treatments. I'm super grateful to have met Alana and feel like she's a friend too, even though we've never met in real life. She's a mom like me and understands my desire to heal my unhealthy coping habits so I can set my daughter up for success. So I'm leaving you with this. Number one, make sure that you got the workbook that accompanies this presentation. So that's freedomwithfoodandfitness.com/sugar. It'll walk you through the 5 strategies that will help you befriend sugar and beat that addiction that you think you have. And then for anybody who is on this call, I want to give $200 off any of my coaching packages. Obviously, this excludes the $47 base package, but any of the other packages, you'll get $200 off if you mention that you are a part of the Brain and Cognitive Sciences Conference. So that will be at freedomwithfoodandfitness.com/discover to schedule a call with me, a free 15-minute call, so we can see what your needs are and see if you'd be good for the program. I also, in 11 days, am releasing my debut book, Freedom with Food and Fitness. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. If you pre-order the book, you actually get $250 in bonus gifts. So there's 11 days left to pre-order Freedom with Food and Fitness and get those bonus gifts. I would love for everybody to come find me on Instagram at Freedom with Food and Fitness. I'm sure the lovely people who are putting on this conference have all of my contact info for everybody to grab, but I would love to speak to everybody on Instagram. So again, that's at Freedom with Food and Fitness. And I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you feel more empowered to tackle your relationship with
starting
Oh my God, Miss Alana. I just don't know why I never think about it. But finally, the crux is it was not the addiction or the obsession of sugar, but the rejection from us. Yeah.
Yes, it's the restriction. It's the fact we've been told we can't have sugar that makes us feel like we must have it.
Yes, exactly. And definitely I'm gonna. So what do you suggest? We should eat sugar whenever we want?
Absolutely.
Like that?
Absolutely. Yes. As long as you ask yourself, like, how am I going to feel after I eat this? You know what I'm saying? Because I don't think we pay attention to how our bodies feel after we eat something. But it can be very powerful to really pay attention, because you'll actually find that when you allow yourself the sugar, you'll crave it less. Does anybody have any? I think our host is frozen, but does anybody have any questions? I mean, I can't see any questions on LinkedIn, but again, if you're on LinkedIn and you really have a question, you could just pop over to my Instagram at Freedom with Food and Fitness and ask. But if anybody on the Zoom has a question, feel free. Helishia, yeah, you have a question?
Hey, good day. Thank you very much for that nice talk. What I wanted to find out is, how does emotional eating fit into your plan?
Okay, so yeah, so we talk in intuitive eating that there are 4 different types of hunger, and one of them is emotional hunger. And what we say is, emotional hunger is totally valid. Like, there are absolutely times where I've had a rough day at work and I say to myself, all right, I want this chocolate. I'm going to have this chocolate. It's going to make me feel better. And I think that's totally fine to do. I think we get into trouble when we rely on food as our only source of emotional coping. So I like to give my clients a couple of different, tools that they can put in their emotional toolkit that aren't just food, right? Deep breathing exercises, meditative exercises, journaling, walking. Fitness is a wonderful way to cope with emotions. In fact, fitness is a great way to get a dopamine hit. That's not sugar. So again, I always say emotional eating is valid. I don't think that we should say that it's not okay, but I think we need to make sure that we not only have other ways of coping with emotions, but also we know how to manage our mind. I have a signature coaching method that I have with my clients. It's based on cognitive behavioral therapy, where I help them manage their thoughts and emotions, because they are in charge of those. thoughts and emotions aren't something that happen to us, they're something that we create. So if we can create the right thoughts and emotions, we won't have to rely on food and sugar as our source of coping.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for awarding me the opportunity to speak on sleep spindle characteristics in a developmentally normal infant cohort from the Western Cape of South Africa. I'm sure the talk won't be as interesting as Miss Alana's, but please just bear with me. So, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with electroencephalograms. For short, we call it EEG, but it's a test that to evaluate the potential differences between neurons in the brain. EEG is used as a diagnostic tool for epilepsy. More recently, however, researchers have used it as a biomarker for brain function. And one of these brain waves that they are specifically looking at are sleep spindles. So what is sleep spindles? The spindles are oscillating potentials that's known for its characteristic waxing and waning on the EEG and is generated in the thalamus of the brain. Spindles were first recorded by Hans Berger, but subsequently described by Loomis et al. In 1935. It was the first feature of sleep to be described in human recordings. So sleep spindles are also the hallmark of stage 2 sleep. There are two types of sleep spindles. Slow spindles with a frequency of 9 to 11 Hz is found predominantly in the frontal head regions on the EEG, while the faster spindles with a frequency of 12 to 16 Hz is found centrally and parietally on the EEG. The two types of spindles are thought to have developed from different generators within the thalamus of the brain, and these spindles also serve different functions. Slow spindles are thought to be involved with visual perception, while the faster spindles are related to cognition. Bodis et al. Noted that spindles density can vary at a rate of between 3 to 8 spindles per minute in different individuals, but it stays very stable across different nights in the same individual. So, sleep spindles can potentially be used to identify cognitive or perceptual impairments if it's compared to established norms. This is just a EEG of a 5-month-old infant taken at the Red Cross Children's Hospital, where we can see central and a little bit of parietal sleep spindles, more pronounced on the right. Figure 2 shows how sleep spindle generation is a network event. GABA neurons in the thalamic cortical nucleus plays a vital role in the generation of sleep spindles. They are responsible for the highly synchronized bursts at the start of the spindle. This is due to hyperpolarization in the TRN membrane potential. In turn, it leads to hyperpolarization of the neighboring thalamic cortical neurons. So then firing is suppressed, the membrane depolarizes, and it leads to a burst of action potential. Cortical thalamic neurons also appears to increase their firing rate, and they are responsible for the asynchronous firing during the spindle waning phase. So spindles undergo rapid changes throughout the first 2 years of life. However, most development stays stable between the ages of 3 to 9 months of age. And during this period, spindles reaches their maximums in terms of density, duration, and frequency. This is followed by a decrease to minimum values by 27 months. It remains constant up to 54 months of age. But of note is that by 12 months of age, spindles should be bilaterally synchronous. However, little is known about the characteristics of sleep spindles in the South African and the sub-Saharan African population. So, the aim of the study was to examine whether there were any differences in spindle density, duration, or frequency of the infants between the ages of 3 to 9 months, specifically looking at the central and the parietal spindles which is related to cognition. And also whether these findings are comparative to international values from American and European centers. Additionally, whether low weight for age had an influence on the spindle characteristics, as stunting is associated with cognitive impairment. And lastly, the study also examined whether there were differences between the spindle characteristics of the natural sleep group and those that were given melatonin. So you're probably wondering, what is melatonin? At Red Cross Children's Hospital, we use melatonin to induce sleep. Okay, melatonin is a hormone that is produced by the pineal gland in response to darkness. So light inhibits its synthesis. So plasma melatonin levels are very low during the day and it's high at night. It has been observed that administering melatonin during the day when levels are low results in the induction of sleep in humans. But of note is that melatonin is non-sedating and it does not alter the macro sleep architecture of the patient. It's only the sleep onset latency that's decreased. So a study by Ibikwe found that melatonin has no effect on the EEG recordings, and that is why it's used by many laboratories across the world to induce sleep. So for this study, it was a retrospective cohort study of developmentally normal infants. The patients were identified from the routine EEG services at Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital, and these EEGs were performed between January 2018 and July 2023. The referral reasons were seizures, apneas, syncope, and infantile spasms. Our inclusion criteria included normal development and a normal sleep EEG. To be excluded was any preterm infants, patients on any chronic medication that might influence the EEG, and any history of pre or perinatal birth injury. So we obtained ethical approval from Red Cross Children's Hospital, as well as from the Durban University of Technology, as the University of Cape Town. So the normative data, what do we know about sleep spindles? The absence of sleep spindles after 3 months of age is generally considered abnormal. But typically, spindles have a long duration in the first 6 months of life. It can be up to 6 seconds. And then during the second 6 months of life, it shows a steady decrease to about 2 seconds. An article by Gruber and Wise states that infants up to 9 months of age have a relatively low density, long duration, and short spindle interval. Also, a Swedish review article by Fernandez and Luthi examined 2,000 adults and found a mean spindle frequency of 13.3 Hz, a duration of 0.7 seconds, and densities of 2.3 spindles per minute. So these EEGs were recorded on a 16-channel neon-codon Neurofax EEG machine. It included 22 scalp electrodes. The electrodes were placed as per the International 1020 system. Additional EMG and ECG electrodes were added. The recording was acquired using a longitudinal bipolar montage. The patient's scalps were prepared with skin pure to ensure impedances were below 5 kHz. Electrodes were fixed with Alifix paste, and patients' heads were covered with crepe bandages to keep the electrodes in place. Each of the recordings included a minimum of 30 minutes of sleep. Sleep was achieved naturally in 63.6% of the patients, and the remaining 36.4% received the synthetic melatonin. So, with the analysis, the spindles were independently reviewed by 2 specialists, 1 neurophysiologist and 1 adult neurologist. The scoring was done according to the standard scoring criteria from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. A third pediatric neurologist was available to arbitrate any differences in scoring between the two independent reviewers. So statistical analysis, we use descriptive statistics to compute for frequency, density, and duration of the sleep spindles. And then we reported it as means and standard deviations for normally distributed values. Statistics were computed for differences in sleep spindle characteristics of the natural and melatonin-induced sleep groups. And then also weight for age were calculated for the different age groups. So in our results, of the 69 patients, 14 were ultimately excluded due to specific and non-specific abnormalities on their EEGs. These included focal or generalized epileptic activity or slowing. The remaining 55 participants consisted of 28 females and 27 males. They all had uncomplicated birth histories, normal neurodevelopment, and obviously a normal sleep EEG. 57% were of mixed ancestry, 38% African, and 5% were European, because this is reflective of the typical population statistics in the Western Cape of South Africa. We also measured the weight for age, and it was for 50 out of the 55 patients. 22 of the boys were 3 standard deviations below the mean, as calculated by the World Health Organization. 18% were between 1 and 2 standard deviations below the mean. Similarly, 16% of the girls measured at 3 standard deviations below the mean, and 37% were 2 standard deviations below the mean. So, sleep spindle density showed an inverted U-shaped distribution. At 3 months, density of the sleep spindles were 2.7 spindles per minute with a standard deviation of 1.3. It gradually increased to a maximum by the age of 5 months at 4.5 spindles per minute. Thereafter, it decreased again until it reached a minimum at 9 months of age of 3.5 spindles per minute. The z-score for the density was 0.55. Spindle frequency were between 12.1 and 13 Hertz. Spindle duration varied between 1.6 and 3.4 seconds. But as you can also see, the duration was longest in the 3-month-old and steadily declining until the lowest at 9 months of age of 1.7. Mean frequency were also similar between the natural sleep group, which was 12.6, and those that were given melatonin, which was 12.4. So it's very similar. Mean sleep spindle duration measured at 1.9 for the melatonin group and 2.6 for the natural sleep group. So there was no statistically significant difference in sleep spindle frequency between the different age groups. The frequency was also comparable to international normative values. The spindle density was lowest in the 3-month group, gradually increasing to 5 months and then started decreasing again. And this reflects similar findings by Gruber and Wise. The minute difference in duration was found to be not statistically significant. Because South Africa is a multi-ethnic population, this was reflected in the race distribution of the study participants. But the study demonstrated that sleep spindle density, duration, and frequency is similar irrespective of location or ancestry. Also, there was no difference noted between male and female sleep spindle characteristics. Melatonin did not alter any sleep characteristics if it was compared to the natural sleep group. And we all know that stunted infants are known to have cognitive impairments. However, the study did not find any difference in the sleep spindle characteristics of the low weight for age group and the normal weight for age groups. So in conclusion, the study demonstrated that sleep spindles in developmentally normal infants in South Africa is comparable to internationally recognized standards. The mode of sleep induction had no effect on the findings. Gender does not alter sleep spindle characteristics, neither does low weight for age. The reason we did this is to establish normative data for the SA population, because all available data is from American and European centers. Standardization of sleep spindle characteristics may assist local clinicians with early biomarker indicators for at-risk children, which is evident via routine EEGs. And then lastly, this data forms part of a stage project which explores the use of sleep spindles as a viable biomarker for neurodevelopmentally at-risk infants in a resource-limited setting. Thank you.